Alright, me darlings! Well, it's time once again to do my obligatory Doctor Who video for the year, but this time I thought I'd go about something a bit different than usual, and look at something a bit more out of left field for Doctor Who, that being one of its spin-offs.
Oh, is it gonna be K9 and Company?
No, not that one.
Torchwood?
No, not that one either.
Class?
Oh god, no, definitely not that one. I think we'd all rather forget that travesty even exists. No, I'm going to be looking at Doctor Who's major contribution to the CBBC library of the 2010s, the Sarah Jane Adventures. Yes, it's time to look at the show that brought new life to one of the franchise's most beloved characters, and gave Russell T Davies a platform to write in that actually worked out better for him than the main show he was working on at the time. But, of course, the history first. Sarah Jane Smith, played by the late Elizabeth Sladen, was one of the Doctor's most long-running companions. She first joined in the classic serial The Time Warrior, where she was introduced as a journalist, and a bloody determined one at that.
He was there when one of the scientists was taken. He has a machine that can travel through time. Well, it must be him. And somehow we've got to stop him.
The Lois Lane of the Doctor Who world, then?
Pretty much. Though, thankfully, we never got a moment in the show where the Doctor erases Sarah's memory by kissing her. She often showed herself as not sitting around waiting to be rescued, and rallying people to her aid, and helping them out too, such as in Planet of the Spiders or Genesis of the Daleks. And part of the reason she did endear with audiences was Sladen's performance. With a mixture of that old-fashioned British finesse and delicately mixed with her go-getter attitude and resourcefulness, it really made her a great character, and one that felt quite progressive. Or at least as progressive as the BBC in the mid-70s could be. The character lasted through the rest of the Pertwee run, and even well into the Tom Baker run, where she eventually left the show, but the character did pop up again every now and then in other spin-off material, including a pilot for the Tin Dog K9 themed series K9 and Company, which sadly never got off the ground, until eventually the character was welcomed back with loving arms in the revived series with School Reunion, where she got to interact with the 10th Doctor, and really showed off her acting ability this time.
Did I do something wrong? Because you never came back for me. You just dumped me.
Oh, you didn't need me. You were getting on with your life.
You were my life.
Or at least as much as you can in a show where you own a metal dog who's fighting space gargoyles. School Reunion isn't the best episode of the series, and kind of feels like it's pandering a little bit to the kid audience, but as a tribute to Sarah Jane, and a nice analysis of the Doctor's attitude to how many assistants he's gone through, it's worth watching. But it does work in its primary true intention, that being a backdoor pilot for this. On New Year's Day the following year, the pilot for Sarah Jane Adventures premiered and was a big hit. And a few months later, the first full series premiered on CBBC, and became one of the biggest shows of this generation of the channel. And it's not hard to see why. One of the biggest issues that CBBC has always had is making action and sci-fi shows on their network. And while they may outsource shows from other networks to fill the gaps, or just fill them with more game shows, they couldn't quite hold up to shows like Power Rangers and Pokemon that were on the other side. And with Sarah Jane Adventures, while it was nowhere near those shows' levels of excitement, as a BBC-made action-adventure series for kids, it did a very good job. And, of course, the thing that made it so much fun, besides the cool aliens and decent special effects, was Sladen. Bringing her old-fashioned charm to this series, it really made it stand out. I mean, think about it. The older mentor figure in most kid action shows was always a rather stuffy, dull, and stoic character who didn't really do much. But Sarah Jane's no-nonsense attitude and her willingness to get her hands dirty really made this show stand out amongst the others. And with a great cast of other characters and guest stars, it really made this show a fun watch, despite some occasional odd writing quirks and some goofy ideas. But it's still technically Doctor Who, so we should expect that. And the show lasted 5 series, but was sadly cut short by the fact that Sladen tragically passed away in 2011. And in honour of this series, which is arguably the most popular Doctor Who spin-off, let's take a look at the 10 best episodes today. Yes, it's the top 10 episodes of Sarah Jane Adventures.
In the words of the Doctor, allons-y!
Number 10. Invasion of the Bane. I felt it best to start off with the first episode, since while it is a good one, it's not the best of the whole series. As a way of reintroducing Sarah and establishing that she's now using her journalist job as a front to help defeat alien threats, it's great. And showing her setup in her damn fine house with her supercomputer aide Mr. Smith, played by Alexander Armstrong.
Good afternoon, Sarah Jane.
And showing off her Sonic lipstick. Given that lipstick manufacturers have made shades every colour of the rainbow and beyond, I wouldn't be surprised if there was one called Sonic.
New from Chanel, Sonic lipstick. It won't make your lips look fuller, but it does help you open doors.
And not just to nightclubs. It also does a good job at introducing the future main characters like Sarah's neighbour Maria and her adoptive son Luke, who are great characters, but the plot seems a little bit weak. I mean, an alien species trying to take over the Earth by mind controlling the population by releasing a popular soft drink. So they make a synthetic boy made up of the minds of over 10,000 other humans to find out why they don't like it.
Have you never heard of focus groups? That's the real way you destroy the world.
Also, the character of Kelsey is really annoying.
You haven't got music channels. What's the point if you haven't got music channels? I saw a muffin in a suit. That's all. Like in the films, it's pretend. Not so bad yourself, fella.
What does that mean?
Oh, he's mine.
Is that good or bad?
That's bad.
I get what they were trying to do with making her a character that was to appeal to people who usually wouldn't watch this kind of show, but it just felt very pandering. Thankfully, she didn't hang around for very long and was replaced by Clyde at the beginning of the first series, which was all for the better, really. Also, what's the point of making a Sarah Jane series if you exclude K9 from it? I still don't know why they did that, though thankfully he did become a main character again in Series 3, and then left again at the beginning of Series 4. Maybe K9 is just a massive prima donna. I can certainly relate having to share the limelight with a tetchy K9 character.
Watch it.
Still, the episode does have its highlights, such as Samantha Bond's performance as the villain, Mrs. Wormwood. No, not that one.
They gorge and feast and chew and bite. Everything sweet and hot and cold and sticky food and drink. Just food and drink. That's the human race.
And the introduction of the new characters, besides Kelsey, are done really well, including the others like Maria's dad, and the whole thing ends with a great feeling and a sense of anticipation on what's to come next. Overall, a flawed but solid beginning to a great series, but from here, we can only go up. Number 9. Secrets in the Stars. This takes on an idea that I'm surprised that Doctor Who hadn't taken on before: astrology. Regardless of whether your thoughts might be on the subject, it's hard to deny that the iconography and mythology that astrology is based around can be quite fascinating. And in this episode, it's revealed that there is a power in the stars, in the form of a group of ancient beings known as the Ancient Lights, who possess an astrologer to take over the world, one star sign at a time. They'd have trouble with me, since a lot of astrologers can't decide whether or not Capricorn begins on the 22nd or 21st of December. What star sign are you, Huck?
How the hell should I know? It's not like foxes put up calendars in their dens.
This episode can be a tad goofy at times, but the thing that really makes it worthwhile is Russ Abbott's performance as Martin Truman.
You have fought many battles in your life. You're about to fight another, but this time, it will be different. This time, Sarah Jane, you lose.
It's very odd to see him play a villain, but it really works. He has such a commanding voice and spellbinding presence that it's really a shame he wasn't brought back again. Maybe he felt that the set of the show had no atmosphere. I should also point out that by this series, Maria had left the show and was replaced by Rani, who was a good character, but I think Maria was the better of the two. And I'm not just saying that because I had a crush on her when I was a kid.
Right.
I'm not! This episode also gives Luke some great coverage and a really good chance to bring himself into the hero role, which is great because the series focused a lot on Clyde, so it's great to see him get some appreciation as well.
I wasn't born. I have no birthday. No star sign. So astrology doesn't work on me.
After all, you'd think a teenager with a brain the size of a planet would be more appreciated. But no, all he does is flick a switch. Still a good episode, but Sadly, the Star of Abbott never shone on this series again.
You are not the center of the universe. It turns out I am. And I never even knew it.
Number 8. The Gift. Series 3 wasn't the best series of the show. Most of the episodes had either really stupid stories or stories that weren't very well executed. There was some promise with the episode Mona Lisa's Revenge, but then the Mona Lisa started talking.
And I thought you were supposed to be an art expert. I am the Mona Lisa.
Why does the Mona Lisa have a northern accent and act like Harley Quinn?
I guess we shouldn't be surprised. After all, that painting's a fake.
Points to any Doctor Who fans who get that reference. However, the last episode of the series was a definite improvement over the rest, with The Gift. Throughout the series, the most recurring bad guys have been the Slitheen, big, green, slimy bastards who hide in the skin of fat people and use the Earth and their methods for profit, as they're a crime family, not an alien species. They were introduced in Series 1 of the new Doctor Who, but they didn't really work there, and they were hard to take seriously because they joked around a lot. And of course, the farting.
Oh, there I go.
I'm shaking my booty.
It doesn't matter what explanation you give, Russell, it's still stupid. However, they do work much better for a kids show, if you ignore the fact that they eat humans and wear their skin, and were a perfect adversary to go up against in some of the first outings of this show. However, in The Gift, we're introduced to the Blathereen, distant cousins of the Slitheen who come from the home planet of
Raxacoricophalopatorius.
Can you say that name, Huck?
Oh fuck.
Alright there, give it a rest, don't hurt yourself.
Whew. This is worse than the time you made me sing I am the very model of a modern Major General.
Who bring an emissary gift as an apology for all the Slitheen have done over the years. A plant that can be planted anywhere on the planet and be used as a superfood and fuel. Naturally, Sarah is excited about this, but finds that there's more to the plant than first appears. I like this episode not only because it provides the only good episode of Series 3, but it provides a genuinely real threat and feels like a kid's version of 28 Days Later, or the plant story of Creepshow. The idea of just spores from a plant that can kill you, it's a really fascinating idea and can be really scary, so long as you don't do it like this.
Just going to talk in a very positive manner, giving off good vibes.
It's also a really good bait and switch by having an alien pair who seem like they could be friendly, and it's also a really good cost-effective way of getting use out of the same costumes. Not that Doctor Who has any problems with cutting corners budget-wise normally. It was good to see the series pick back up again in the last lap, and show promise for better things in the following series, which also had a really good final episode. Speaking of which... Number 7. Goodbye, Sarah Jane Smith. While The Gift was a good final episode, this was one of the show's best, and sadly would have worked really well for the final episode of the whole show, but sadly it wasn't, but more on that later. Sarah feels that she's starting to get too old for her work and needs to pass the torch.
Maybe you should be doing the same? To me?
You wish, I'm only 28.
Pfft, that's ancient in YouTuber years.
Shut up. But she can't pass it on to any of the kids because they're too young. But suddenly, a woman comes out of the blue who seems to be doing a much better job than she was, so Sarah considers making her her protege. But of course, things don't turn out the way they seem. The thing I love about this episode is that it really does have a sense of finality to it. Like I said, it would have been a perfect endgame for the show, with Sarah considering retiring, and one of the few times where it seems that she would actually die in an episode. It features the return of Luke, who left at the beginning of the series, but more about that later, and it would have truly been the best way to end the show, but of course they didn't, and they went on to make a very abrupt Series 5. Abrupt because... well, you know. Since there are no Series 5 episodes on the list, I'll give my quick thoughts here. 1. Sky is annoying and a really cheap way of making the show appeal to an even younger audience.
Do you always do what Sarah Jane tells you to?
Look, this is a nuclear power station, which makes going in there with you like doing a Houses of Parliament tour with Guy Fawkes.
But Earth won't stand a chance. You've been kind to me, Sarah Jane. You've tried to keep me safe. But this is what I was created for.
And a really transparent replacement for Luke. and does kind of feel like a bit of a Mary Sue given her powers. Admittedly, the unused reveal of her being the trickster's daughter would have been really cool, but they never got to that, so it's... I mean, I had to put that in there. Alexander Armstrong is in the show. Speaking of which, 2. There were actually a lot of really good story ideas in this series that were sadly never seen due to the show being ended early, such as Mr. Smith becoming human and the return of Sophie Aldred as Ace, which would have been really cool, but again, sadly, that never manifested in this show, though we did get to see it in Power of the Doctor, which was pretty cool. And 3, it seems in poor taste to even release this series given that it was cut short due to rather unfortunate reasons. Though it did lead to the webcast Farewell Sarah Jane, which I have not seen yet, so sorry if you were expecting to see it on this list, though it doesn't really count as an episode anyway.
Can we get back on track here?
Oh, yes, right, back to Goodbye Sarah Jane. It is still a great episode, with the character of Ruby White making a great villain, and it's always good to see episode where Sarah Jane has to face problems herself and make her face her own flaws. Plus, the idea of an alien who has their stomach separate from their body is a pretty macabre and grotesque idea, and it really works for this episode. Thankfully, we never got to see what happens when the stomach is finished digesting. I think we have enough gross out stuff with the Slitheen, thank you very much. Number 6. The Lost Boy. Funny how I have so many series finales back to back in this countdown. Sarah Jane Adventures really knew how to do a last episode, something that the show it spawned from can't always do very well.
Oh yeah, we went there.
In the final episode of Series 1, a couple are asking on the news for their lost son to come home, which turns out to be none other than Luke. Naturally confused since he was grown by the Bane, this then leads into a series of very emotional events which ends up with Luke leaving and going to live with his real parents, who, given the way that they act, it's not surprising that he ran away.
Why did you lock my door? Well, you ran away once, remember?
That doesn't matter. You won't see him again.
Word of advice, Luke. Don't go in the basement. Of course, it all turns out to have been a trick by the Slitheen, but as it turns out, they have an unlikely ally in this plan. What I love about this episode is how the first half really plays with your mind. You genuinely wonder what's going on and who's lying and who's not. It's a really good way of playing with your sense of trust with these characters, which is something that Russell T Davies really does well with his writing. And while he didn't write this episode, I can tell it had a lot of his input on it, since the first half reminds me a lot of the Doctor Who episode Midnight. The second episode breaks the ground beneath our feet by revealing who the big boss is, which is a fantastic twist that I won't dare spoil, and it gives us some really great moments. Plus, the episode gets an extra point with the inclusion of Lady Floella Benjamin.
The Pharos Institute doesn't get nearly enough media interest. Most people write off our researchers as cranks. Sir Isaac Newton and Thomas Edison both had strong interest in the paranormal, Miss Smith.
Who, just voicing my opinion on this, I think would have been a much better choice for a black female doctor than Joe Martin. And it's a great chance for Maria's dad to get in on the action, as he actually kind of saves the day here. Another reason I like Maria better, her dad was awesome.
Another childhood crush of yours there?
Let's move on. But as good as this episode was, it's still not the best series finale. No, that honour goes to... Number 5. Enemy of the Bane. The last episode of Series 2, and by far the best finale the series ever got. Mrs. Wormwood, having somehow survived the explosion at the Bubble Shock factory, yeah, they never explained that, has returned looking for Sarah Jane's help. Since Sarah Jane destroyed the Bane mother, Mrs. Wormwood is now seen as an enemy of the Bane.
Which surely means they would go after Sarah Jane and not Wormwood, right?
Aliens and Doctor Who never make any sense. Well, anyway, Mrs. Wormwood is also trying to stop the Bane from gaining ultimate power by finding and resurrecting Horath, a super powerful being who could control the whole universe, and thus ask Sarah Jane for help. Yeah, right. While Mrs. Wormwood's ulterior motives are not particularly subtle, her moments with Luke over the identity crisis of who his mother really is are really well done.
I created you. It must have been very difficult for you, Luke. Being born into this strange world. Knowing so much and yet nothing at all.
And the performance from Luke, Wormwood, and especially Sarah Jane are excellent. And it really goes into the deep self-identity thing about Luke's being that hadn't really been done yet, even in Lost Boy, and it really works.
I enjoy my life. This world is complicated.
They also bring back the Sontar Ka from a previous episode, who is also a surprisingly deep character. A Sontaran who has been rejected by his kinsman and is trying to find his purpose in the world where he now has no war to fight anymore. And it mixes it well with the issues that Luke is going through. And of course, the Brig himself comes back with Nicholas Courtney reprising his role.
In my day, we took on Daleks, Cybermen, Autons, Zygons, and all manner of space thuggery. And it doesn't get more hostile than that.
It's a shame that he never reappeared in the main series again, but he does do a great job here as always. Plus, this is probably the biggest threat that the Bannerman Road Gang has ever come across, and while the threat is mostly lip service and the final battle is a bit wishy-washy, the fact that Sarah Jane takes down this potentially universe-level threat is really cool. I'm not sure if the sonic screwdriver could blow this thing up. Maybe the Doctor needs to think of an upgrade. Then again, it's pretty hard to beat the Sonic Cane.
Sonic Cane? Are you serious?
Seriously, someone make that and sell it to me. I really want one.
Are you just gonna use it to hit me?
We'll see, Huck. We'll see. Number 4. The Nightmare Man. Ever wondered what would happen if Doctor Who was more like Nightmare on Elm Street? Well, strap yourselves in because they made it happen before the episode Night Terrors, or Can You Hear Me, that is. Luke is getting ready to go to Oxford, but starts having odd nightmares about a man who looks like an evil street mime, which is doubly weird because Luke can't dream. It was programmed out of his genetic code. It's later revealed that this Nightmare Man is an extra-dimensional alien who feeds off of the nightmares of others, and is using Luke's powerful mind to enter into the real world.
So it's the plot of Nightmare on Elm Street 5, but this time the kid's actually been born?
Pretty much, yeah. While this episode does owe a lot to a previous episode in the series that we'll go into later, it really does feel like a kid version of Nightmare on Elm Street, just without this stuff, of course.
What a waste.
Despite that though, it really works, and you do get a sense of fear and atmosphere throughout this episode, and the Nightmare Man himself is awesome.
What do you want?
Life. Your nightmares. Your fear. I'll send everyone into an eternal sleep, a whole world of nightmares for me to feed upon.
He does have a somewhat Freddy Krueger feel about him, but with a French accent, for some reason.
Bon appetit!
He's also played by the same actor who plays Davros in the modern series, Julian Bleach, who does an awesome job, so it's good to see that he has some versatility. It's also a great farewell to Luke as he left the series after this episode, alongside K9 as I mentioned. It was a shame to see him go, but it was really clever that they incorporated his departure so well into the episode, and really gives us some emotional moments. Plus it plays into the nightmare elements with Luke worrying about if he'd be forgotten and replaced after he left, which ironically is exactly what did happen, so maybe he wasn't far off with his fears. It's also really funny to see Sladen playing an older version of Sarah Jane in Clyde's Nightmare, and Rani's Nightmare has some great meta-commentary.
Why do you want to destroy Sarah Jane? Why do you think? The woman's a menace to society. What are you on about? She saves the world. At what cost, Rani? You, Clyde, even her own son?
Huh, she must be working for Fox News.
Number 3. Whatever Happened to Sarah Jane and The Temptation of Sarah Jane Smith. I decided to put these two episodes together because they're really both very similar, with having the same antagonist, but also because I genuinely couldn't decide between them. In both these episodes, Sarah Jane takes on the Trickster, by far the best reoccurring villain in the series, as I've said before. He's kind of a Faustian devil figure, offering people what they want in exchange for changing time, because he feeds off of chaos energy, and by changing time, he can cause chaos so he can feed. Hey man, if you want chaos, just go to Ibiza or Magaluf, you'll gorge yourself there.
Or America. It's been going deeper into insanity in the last decade.
He's a really scary and fascinating character, and is basically a god, so it's really cool to see Sarah Jane take him on. In his first episode, Whatever Happened to Sarah Jane,
in which she does not shove Joan Crawford down the stairs,
he goes back to the 60s and makes Sarah Jane's childhood friend, Andrea Yates, no, definitely not that one, switch places with her during an accident in their youth in which she died, thus making Sarah Jane never exist. Well, if you wanted chaos, you've got it. I mean, who could imagine a world where K9 and company never happened? As expected, her removal results in an asteroid nearly hitting Earth, but Maria remembers Sarah thanks to this odd box that looks like the Lament configuration from Hellraiser, and tries to bring her back. This episode gives us some really good performances from the cast, especially from Andrea's actress Jane Asher, who does a spectacular job.
I had to send her away. What could Maria do to you?
She made me remember.
I mean, I would have expected nothing less from the woman who played the unforgettable role in Quatermass as Little Girl.
One of the greatest roles in movie history.
The second episode he appears in deals with an element of Sarah Jane's history that had never been really addressed before. It was established in The Time Warrior that she was brought up with her Aunt Lavinia and her parents were never around, but it was never explained what happened to them. Well, as it turns out, they did a Howard and Maria Stark by dying in a car crash when she was a baby, but the trickster goes back in time and prevents that from ever happening, forcing Sarah to choose between the fate of the world or having her parents back. And honestly, who wouldn't want their dad back when he's played by Stephen from Basil Brush?
You see, our generation, we had all the upheaval, the danger, but Sarah Jane's gonna have a better life.
AKA your other missing twin. Fathead, and hangs out with a cool fox that's much funnier than him.
Quiet, yo. This episode probably has Sladen at her best in terms of acting, especially since this is a story that is almost too good for a kids show and is pretty heavy as a concept, but it really works well, and Christopher Peasy, despite feeling kind of out of place in a dramatic role, also does a really good job.
One thing though, it's important. Sarah Jane, our baby, is she safe? Does she have a good life?
Both of these episodes are real highlights, and I really recommend that you check both of them out, provided that the trickster hasn't gone back in time and made them never happen. Number 2. The Death of the Doctor. Sarah Jane Adventures has only had 2 main crossovers with Doctor Who within its own show, and while the first, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, was kind of crap, the second, Death of the Doctor, is one of the best episodes in the series. Sarah Jane is tragically informed by a unit officer that the Doctor has died.
Oh yeah, like she'd believe that.
Well, she indeed doesn't, but decided to come along just in case, where they also run into another classic companion fan favourite.
We've never actually met, but it's Joe Grant, isn't it?
Wow, it's a long time since I've been called that. Actually, it's Joe Jones since I got married.
Good to see you fully clothed and not straddling a Dalek this time. This is Joe Grant, played by Katie Manning, who was the companion to the Doctor just before Sarah Jane Smith was. And it's great to see these two interacting since they were both from the same era, so they can swap some good stories. And the two are so different from each other in terms of personality. While Sarah is confidence and autonomy personified, Jo, while being capable in her own right, is very ditzy, a little airheaded, but has a good heart and is always up for adventure. Which is made clear by how they explain that since she left the TARDIS, her and her family have become huge environmental and human rights activists and have been travelling the world. Now that's how you make a change in the world, not just liking a Facebook page to promote awareness. Of course, the Doctor is not dead, duh, and it turns out to be a trap by the funeral staff, the Claw Shan Sheath, to steal the TARDIS and try to prevent death and misery because they're so sick of it.
We see the pain and the suffering again and again and again, but with the TARDIS, we can stop this.
You're going to stop death?
It is a noble quest to halt the endless weeping.
You know, you could just quit your job.
This episode is great, not just for the return of Jo, but of course the presence of my favourite Doctor, Matt Smith, who does an amazing job as always. We get some more pathos about the Doctor going on how he moves on from his companions when they grow old, but he still cares about them and stays up to date with them.
You're right, I don't look back, I can't. But the last time I was dying, I looked back on all of you, every single one. And I was so proud.
Also, the Claw Shan Sheath are great villains, mostly because of their voices. The main one is voiced by the other First Doctor, David Bradley, and the other two being played by Scarface from Farthingwood himself, John Glover. No wonder he's so sick of death. Being a part of that show would make anybody want to end death. Sadly, the Brig or other companions don't appear here, but I think that worked out for the best, since it allows the focus to stay on Sarah and Joe where it should be, which is excellent. But even with all these amazing elements, it's still not quite the best episode in the series. No, that honour goes to... Number 1. The Day of the Clown. You thought Doctor Who doing Nightmare on Elm Street is cool? Well, wait till you see them do Stephen King's It. A strange new circus museum has come to Ealing, and this creepy clown has been luring kids in, and then they strangely disappear.
Please don't tell me his name is John Wayne.
It's not. It's Odd Bob.
Oh, that sounds even worse.
This episode is great for a number of reasons. The great sense of fear and dread in this episode, and how the premise again goes surprisingly dark and morbid for a kids show, some great character development for Sarah Jane on revealing that she's scared of clowns, and a great look into her childhood on how that came about. The introduction of Rani, who, while I will admit I'm not the biggest fan of, does a great job in her first outing, but the real reason I love this episode is because of one reason: Bradley Walsh.
I am the Pied Piper, who conjured away a whole town's infants and has chilled the hearts of parents for more than 7 centuries.
And now, I am Odd Bob the Clown, who snatches children in the heartbeat their mother's back is turned.
Walsh plays the main bad guy, who is like a wonderful mix of Pennywise, Pinhead from Hellraiser, and Jigsaw. He is so good in all the various characters he plays throughout the episode, and is legitimately creepy. His performance as Odd Bob is a more subtle version of Tim Curry's Pennywise, and has a really disturbing Southern American accent.
Bring them back now!
I can't do that. Can you imagine? A bogeyman that brings children back from Never Land.
His performance as Spellman is, well, spellbinding, and has an almost hypnotic tone to his voice.
I will chill the blood of a nation. 1,000 families will ache with loss, and millions will shudder.
It's funny to think he went on to play another amazing role in Doctor Who several years later, but frankly, knowing that he would be in the show after this, I was genuinely excited, though sadly, he has since left the show. A true tragedy. The plot of this episode is uncannily like Stephen King's It, with a mysterious entity that feeds on fear, but I think this episode actually does that concept a little bit better. For one thing, they leave out the stupid plot twist of it being a giant spider at the end, though to be fair, it wouldn't be the first time Sarah Jane's had to go up against giant spiders. 2, with less characters, it can make the story more focused, and 3, it explains why the entity needs fear, as opposed to It, where it deliberately left the explanation vague.
That's because King couldn't think of a good explanation.
Yeah, we're not kidding, he literally just gave up. But of course, the villain is what makes this episode. There is really nothing I can say that conveys how amazing Walsh's performance is, so just go and watch the episode. Though this show can be a bit hard to find these days since it was taken off Netflix a few years back, and the DVD is a tad expensive, so trying to find this episode can be a little bit of a chase. Oh come on, you know I had to say that. So let's counter that bad joke by showing Bradley Walsh laughing at a dirty name.
Hey, Dick Tingler.
Always a pleasure, Bradders. And that's Sarah Jane Adventures, which is probably the best Doctor Who spin-off to date. Class was awful, and Torchwood had its moments, but it was a bit too melodramatic, and seemed to confuse violence and sex for maturity.
Hey, who says that a story about an alien who needs cum to live can't be sophisticated?
Me, and everyone who watched that episode. But it was worth it for Captain Jack. But Sarah Jane was overall great, and while it had some bumps in its journey, the series generally was a ton of fun and great for all ages. And who knows, maybe in the future we might see some more shows like this. Perhaps we'll have Ace's Adventures, where she teams up with Sabalon Glitz to scam people throughout the galaxy. Maybe we'll find out what happened to Perry after she married Brian Blessed, or perhaps we can find out more about who the next Doctor is going to be.
Well, I can tell you who that's gonna be.
Who?
Me! Check this out!
Well, still makes more sense than making him David Tennant again. But for now, I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye!